based off the last week or the last episode we had, which will be out by the time this is out. I said I was going to do some research on Michael Jackson, Sony, and then eventually Prince and what happened with him. So this is the Rhythm and Rhymes podcast, episode 56. I'm your host, AJ Hughes. I'm with my co-host, Tonio Hughes. And I want to start with a clip of Michael Jackson talking about Sony. And then I want to get into some details of why the deal was so interesting and why it potentially could have a lot of similarities to what is going on today. It's not the same because I don't think the same thing happened, but I think there could potentially be a lot of similarities. So I'm about to share my screen. I'm about to play this clip real quick.
For sure. For sure.
At Sony, I've generated several $1 billion for Sony, several billion, and they really thought that my mind is always on music and dancing, and it usually is, but they never thought that this performer myself would outthink them.
I just want to say whoever else is on the mic is fucking annoying through this clip. So halfway through, we're not going to watch the whole thing, but halfway through, I'm going to stop it. No, listen, it gets worse.
So I'm leaving Sony a free agent. Owning half of Sony. So I own half of Sony's publishing and I'm leaving them, and they're very angry at me because of it. But I just did good business, you know. So the way they get revenge is to try and destroy my album. But I've always said, you know, good art never dies. And Tommy Mottola is a devil.
I don't want to get into Tommy Mottola too much. That feels like a deeper, darker criminal link. I started Googling and I was like, I don't want to say anything about that guy. But I watched this, bro, and I had to go like really research where the point of contention was between Sony and Mike because I didn't really understand it. You know what I'm saying? So I'm gonna give you the details in a sort of async way because the timeline is a little bit confusing, right? So in 19 one second. One second. So Sony's publishing arm is called Sony slash ATV Music Publishing, right? And that's because it was essentially at first two separate companies and they merged together. You can hear me, right? Oh, okay. Yeah, so it was two separate companies. It was Sony Music and then it was ATV Music. And Mike owned ATV Music. He bought that in when was this? 1985, right? And the reason this is important is because ATV Music they had the controlling rights to the Beatles catalog, right? So ATV initially was an arm of a television like production type company, and they were just buying a ton of publishing because they were owning the publishing of the music that they were putting in TV and films and stuff like that in the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s. And then they started experiencing financial troubles, even though they still had rights to the ownership. And so at that point, Mike ended up buying them in 1985 for $47 million, right? And so at the time, people were like, there was a ton of people bidding on it, a ton of people trying to get this, but nobody ended up making a deal as good as Mike because I guess at the time, the profits weren't reflective of that 47. Like certain people said that it might be worth like 38 to 39. So people don't want to buy it, right? So once he starts owning it, he starts using the Beatles catalog in a lot of different commercials and stuff like that. And so he starts generating more revenue. And so within the 10 years that comes up, because in 1995, Sony ended up buying half of that catalog for $110 million. So that goes to show you just how much Mike was able to be smart about the publishing. You know what I'm saying? Like, it was only worth so much. It was only worth $47 million. And so he ended up raising the value of that in Sony's eyes to $220 million in 10 years. So that says a lot about his understanding of the way that it worked. And just to go back a little bit, I thought this was a bit an interesting story of how he learned about publishing. It'll be quick, but okay. In 1981, American singer Michael Jackson collaborated with Paul McCartney, writing and recording several songs together. Jackson stayed at the home of McCartney with his wife Linda, and during the recording sessions, they became friendly. And at the dinner table, McCartney brought out a thick bound notebook displaying the songs to which he owned the publishing rights. So McCartney and Lennon, members of the Beatles, they had rights in owning of ATV, or was it this is where it gets kind of funky because their shit was owned by Northern um where's it at? No, it was ATV. There was a bunch of subsidiaries and stuff, but they had some of the ownerships of that. And so he pulls out this book and they're just going through it, thousands and thousands and thousands of songs that he has ownership in. And so Mike, at the table that day, he replied to McCartney saying that he would buy the Beatles songs one day, and McCartney laughed in his face. This was 4 years before he actually bought it, which I thought was crazy. So then it goes on to say like Mike fulfills the obligations of his contract after the deal with Sony and ATV, right? Which excludes his music and publishing, right? It's only the Beatles, right? It doesn't include Mike's stuff. So now he's fulfilled his obligation to Sony and he wants to leave, and they don't want to let him leave. So they start charging him they say that he didn't pay back his advances on his albums towards the end, that 2001 album Invincible, which is why it didn't really do as great commercially. And that's where you hear the clip where it's like they're trying to shoot me down, they don't want it to do well. So when he becomes a free agent, people are um, giving him deals reflective of his last album. You know what I'm saying? It's sort of like they're trying to devalue him in that way, which this is where I start to look at how it's similar to the Drake thing, right? And I think it's different because we don't know what Drake may or may not own. We don't know if he owns anything, and if that's the reason why they're doing this. But it's clear that there's a concerted effort to devalue him to the market, and whether he's to be a free agent or not soon, we don't know. But I just found it interesting that like once Mike owns half of the publishing and they want the other half, he doesn't want to give it up, and he's about to leave. Now Sony is making a concerted effort to do XYZ. After that comes the cases. After that comes all the other stuff. But at that point, I just found it interesting to look back and see that Mike was just ahead of Sony because Sony wasn't even thinking about publishing when Mike bought it. You know what I'm saying? And once he owned it and he was just like, nah, I ain't giving this up, they had to do business with him for mad long. And they were not trying to do that clearly.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could see that leaning to the like they killed Mike type of story, but I don't know if I feel like are they trying to devalue Drake? I mean, there's a lot of I was listening to some Drake songs this weekend, bro, and there's a lot of lines in a lot of his songs. I was sitting there like, bro, these don't sound right anymore, right? And I don't know if there was a I feel like the industry is against him, but is it his fault or is it the industry just they just see him getting too much power? Like I don't know. I feel like we don't know enough and we haven't been told enough about what Drake has or what Drake owns and any of that shit to really know, bro. That's why I'm so like in the middle with the politics of it all. I'm kind of just focused on the music of it because I'm like, I
Yeah.
don't know what's going on, bro. I feel like there's so much we don't know. I feel like there's so much misinformation, and I feel like there's a lack of like like true transparency from them, and there wouldn't be, because I mean they're a business. Why would they tell you what they're doing? Like, why would Drake sit
Right.
here and tell us his business? But it's like, I could
You're
definitely
right.
see it being true, because I mean even Prince, like Prince had changed his name completely to get out of his publishing. Like there's always been shit in the music industry where people had to finagle stuff just to like just make their art, you know, like. But
You're
yeah,
right. You're right. There's no way to know. And 100% if the focus should be primarily on the music. I just find the other parts of it interesting because it's like when did okay, if we're let's say I don't want to play the speculation games, but a lot of the stuff that people are speculating about Drake isn't new.
yeah,
It's not new. Kendrick packaged it up and was like, "Hey, this your man's. They got your man's." They packaged it up and then put it into some bops, but it's not new. You know what I'm saying? And I just feel like, why now? Why now? And they keep talking about Mike and stuff like that. And I feel like in the moment of it happening with Mike, who was really like how many people were like, "Yo, this Invincible album, like the music is just not good," or it was like, "Damn, maybe he's not selling as well because Sony." You know what I'm saying? You don't know in the moment. Hindsight's 2020. I just found
yeah,
it interesting to go back and look at this. Right? We don't know if anything's true or
right.
false. I was just trying to like, and I think this time we definitely won't know because Mike made it evident that he owned Sony. And I think that kind of is a misstep. But now that we're looking at it in hindsight, right? Or
Yeah,
ATV, that he owned ATV because now they know who they're doing business with. Now you're doing business with the people who own part of uh your um your catalog, right? And if y'all already are at a point of contention, then there may be an issue there. Whereas if he owned like if ATV was owned under a subsidiary and a shell corp, then maybe they don't like come at Mike the same way. You know what I'm
right.
saying? Maybe it doesn't happen that way. And so maybe Drake like owning hella shit or maybe owning into the Larry Jackson shit. Like we don't know if that's true, but maybe he owns something and we don't know it. And so this is why it looks super, super shady and weird now. Maybe it looked different. I don't know. I just thought it would be interesting to go back and look like how did this happen? You know what I'm saying? We don't gotta stay
Yeah.
on it too long. I just found it interesting to read about it and stuff like that. There's a couple articles. I'll put them in the bio. But yeah, man. That
No,
was it.
it's definitely interesting. Like I feel like Mike just has so much power at that time. They had to take him down in some way, bro. Like they were gonna figure out how to devalue him, bro.